The saddest thing about Goblin Slayer is its depictions of rape, sexual molestation, brutalization, and sexual violence against women, which the anime and manga managed to deliberately say nothing about despite it being so plentiful within the story. While the world's story simultaneously doesn't give a fuck about any of the women either, as it's trying to kill them all, as if the author hated all women besides 2 of them. But unfortunately, both of these characters are undeveloped cunts, so they're hard to care about anyway. What's believed by the mass populace of Goblin Slayer's overzealous fanbase, from my personal experience, is that they believe that I'm a homophobic and a gay for not enjoying the gratuitous violence of this pointless series. Now, of course, from my point of view, I believe some of these individuals are fucking morons, spouting nonsensical quotes from the story, acting like Goblin Slayer's their lord and savior, while I can take the high road and explain my reasoning for this. In the anime Banana Fish, yes, the one that features rape and gay sex in it, by nature of what's happening in the context of that story, naturally, the main character associates sex and rape with violence, hence his tragic backstory, making the viewer come to the realization that the protagonist of that series associates sex with violence, hence his fear of particular relationships with other individuals, hence his personality archetype, hence defining who he is, hence the relationships and how intimate he allows himself to be with other people throughout the duration of the series. In Happy Sugar Life, which themes revolve around love and how it can be volatile and perverse at times, the backstory of the kidnapped girl Shio is that Sato's mother is revealed to be a victim of rape, not once, but twice, by her own husband. The story explains that she bumped into this piece of shit guy one day, and unfortunately, due to the very fact that he didn't take too kind to that, he took her into an alleyway and fucked her brains out. Naturally, yes, they do call the police in the story, and they go into court and such, but the asshole rapist's parents, who was unfortunately rich, decided to use legal means and every stopgap imaginable to ultimately stop the proceedings of the court and actually gaining the mother justice. Now, due to the very fact that they can't take this and drag this proceeding on due to financial issues, the parents meet with the other parents who are unfortunately rich, which I bring up once again, and decide to save themselves some grief and decide to settle the entire case by giving the family 2 things: money, and the son has to marry the mother, love or not, to ultimately take responsibility for the situation he created. So she decides to marry this dick, and guess what? He rapes her fucking again, and they have another kid. Then the douche bails on the entire family for about 8 years when his parents die, and he gets a shitload more money, and the mom falls into a crippling, depressing spiral for the next 5 to 6 chapters, which was an entire volume, which then leads her to abandon her own child, which is the Shio character, believing that abandoning her 7-year-old child in the middle of the city would ultimately be a fruitful life than actually living with her and the douchebag rapist father. And at the very end of it, it implies that, well, the mother fucking killed herself. But that's not the entire story. But the supposed villain of the entire series, Sato, aka the kidnapper, becomes the hero for the Shio character when she rescues Shio from her batshit insane family that constantly abused her and had her around a volatile relationship. This fits naturally with the story. Not only does it encapsulate all the themes that the story's been exploring since chapter 1, but it brings it around house, applying it to one of the primary characters, and why they believe what they believe, explaining that facets of love can be perverse and even deadly in some circumstances, and in some cases, it can drive people to the extreme, causing them to do insane things. Now, of course, there's more that has to be said about Happy Sugar Life, but this isn't a video about Happy Sugar Life. Hell, if you really want to argue with me about this, even porn, namely Shindo L's Metamorphosis, which is a horrible standing in its own right, being in a whole fucking league of its own, as one of the most depraved things I've ever laid my eyes on, has so much meaning in it, I can speak about it for a full hour analyzing it and telling you why everything happens within that story and what it all means in its content, and what it means philosophically, and what it means symbolically, what it means altogether, and the hidden meanings that the story author explores by shoving it clearly into a 6-chapter story. Meanwhile, this is Goblin Slayer, and this is Paper Planes fucking 2.0. Do you want to know what I see in particular when I view this clip? What I see is my particular favorite cliche used by authors from anime to manga to visual novels, which is evil just to be evil because the author was too lazy to create real antagonists, with an appetizer of I'm an evil rapist because that's what I am by nature, with a side dish of my favorite thing to be doing is killing people while I cannot communicate with other beings due to the very fact that I'm just inherently evil. So the question becomes, how the fuck do you manage to write a story with this much violence, brutalization, and graphic imagery, but not fucking talk about it at all within the story, while simultaneously manage to create a clusterfuck of an atmosphere where all the characters are retarded? Nothing fits in this goddamn story, politically, tonally, atmospherically, and character-wise. In a total of 40 chapters, including the spin-off series that are also a piece of shit, this manga manages to squeeze in a complete total of 28 rape scenes that occur on and off panel. And not only do they hold no meaning behind them whatsoever besides plot reasons, they are completely unnecessary to tell the story on the frequency and the amount of times that they happen throughout the duration of the reading of Goblin Slayer. But on the positive side, there were 2 attempted rapes that were stopped. But guess who they were reserved for? The 2 biggest cunts of the entire series who do nothing the entire time. Priestess and High Elf Archer. And yes, those are their fucking names because the author didn't want to give them real goddamn names. The story is littered with hypocrisy such as this. It discriminates against anyone that's not in the main cast, explaining that anyone can get raped, beaten, and battered within the series besides the main characters because they are the main characters. In addition to this, the author clearly fucking hates women if he's willing to show women getting brutalized like this when nothing happens to any of the male characters in comparison to anyone else, or anyone the story definitively wants to take notice of. My problem overall isn't with the rape itself for storytelling purposes, but the way it's presented in this story in particular and how everyone reacts to it within this world is so trivial, it's as if nobody fucking cares it's happening in the first place. Like it's a goddamn social norm with zero context. In any medium, rape shouldn't be normal, and talking about rape shouldn't be normalized as if it doesn't matter or cause any psychological damage to any of the characters that it happens to. Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k gets a pass on this, considering the very fact that the writers of the Warhammer series are very adept and capable in their writing, in addition to there being a lot of context behind why they do what they do in that series, with years upon years and books upon books that explain why the human race can genocide one another and why they nuke the fuck out of planets. In fact, if you actually read Warhammer 40k, it actually explains all of the lore in the first book while keeping the narrative concise so new players can ultimately understand what's happening in the story. Goblin Slayer, on the other hand, is written so horrendously, it's hard to honestly care about anything that happens within the series, considering the very fact that no one gives a shit about anything within this world and everything's so goddamn nonsensical. For example, in chapter 18, a character named Blade Maiden is introduced. Now, I'm aware that that is a dumb name, but let's forego that. Point being, 6 chapters later, that being chapter 26, it's revealed that Blade Maiden was gang raped by Goblin. Continuing and proceeding the following pages, Not only did she decide to show off her rape scars to Goblin Slayer, which everyone wanted to fucking see, including me, cause of course I'm into that kind of shit, and if you can't tell I'm being sarcastic, that's on you. But point being, not only does she decide to show off her rape scars to a person she literally met 3 days ago, a man she just barely spoke of and barely knows anything about, she goes on to make Skyrim jokes saying that she couldn't be an adventurer anymore because she was raped, while simultaneously trying to sexually seduce the protagonist, getting in his face trying to fucking kiss him when she just told him she was raped. In addition to this, because the author is so fucking lazy and doesn't want to show any emotion from the main fucking character, instead of being a normal human being and confronting the woman and comforting her, he goes on to ask about if she knows a place where he can get his fucking armor repaired, like he had cotton in his fucking ears. Under zero circumstances, it's just normal unless you're a psychopath or you're that socially inept that you're unable to tell the mood of the entire situation. Now, what the story decides to do is be a little bit funny and say Goblin Slayer reacted this way due to the very fact that he doesn't have experience with these kinds of situations. But common sense fucking dictates that you would be sympathetic to a person and a human being like this. Any other fucking story can do that, but this one. Now, there's a part in the future of this series which I randomly opened in the light novel when I actually went to pick it up, and what it said was that after Goblin Slayer saved the fucking day, of course, because he's the hero, Blade Maiden, whose backstory is that she fought the fucking Demon Lord, but miraculously got caught by goblins somehow, which is a way more entertaining story than the one we're reading fucking right now, has developed a fear of goblins. By the way, we have no clue how the fuck she escaped either. The story just says use your imagination. Point being, due to the very fact that she has a fear of goblins, it makes her completely inept and incapable to fight anything relating to goblins on any level. So at the very end of the arc of the sewer goblin arc, basically what happens is Goblin Slayer saves the fucking day like I said, and his conversation with Blade Maiden is the most cringiest thing I've ever read in my entire life. But the very short version of it is that for some particular reason that's not even explained in the story, because rarely does it even show any amount of trauma whatsoever, is that Blade Maiden has these horrific nightmares whenever she falls asleep that goblins are gonna get her. So what Goblin Slayer says is that he'll kill the goblins even in her fucking dreams, even though that's fucking nonsensical and also impossible, because, and based on the entire idea that he's simply Goblin Slayer. Now, some people would interpret this as cute, but as the following pages go on, it explains how she whores herself out like a prostitute, bats her eyes, blush, and cross her legs, trying to spread her cooch for the main protagonist. That, might I say, she literally met that same week. Now, it's good to keep in mind, this is the same light novel, the same manga, the same anime, the same whatever piece of medium you're reading this story on, where everyone gets skull fucked, women are get raped, women get brutalized, people get eaten out by fucking rock monsters, people get blown up by eye monsters, people watch their friends get devoured by hordes of unsurmountable horrors, while simultaneously the kingdom, the government, and the guild refuses to protect its own interests, ranging from economics to economics to politics to agriculture to ecosystem damage that goblins and monsters cause, simply based on the political agenda that if it doesn't make them money in the long term, ultimately it doesn't matter. So all the villages that produce food get skull raped by goblins and monsters without contest, because the kingdom's too busy sending off all of its troops all continent to fight demons and monsters, which the story refuses to explain. And Goblin Slayer has the nerve to tell this chick that has fucking privilege to be okay, that lives in a fucking high castle, that everything's gonna be okay when everything's not gonna be okay, because nothing makes sense in this goddamn world, man. This is also the same story arc that deliberately points out this flaw to the reader, and they literally have a conversation about why the government system doesn't work, and the Blade Maiden is in the fucking government and she does nothing about it. Cunt. But getting back on topic, With everything I just said, and all the visuals you've seen on screen, it is clear as day, ecchi does not mix with dark fantasy. You cannot have chapters where female characters are brutalized, violently raped, and fucking sodomized, while the next chapter or segment is focused on all the boobs bouncing around and all the ass and the tits that fly around, while cracking jokes like none of this dark shit is happening in the world. In fact, a majority of the characters in this series seem to be completely oblivious to how horrific everything really is. On a multitude of occasions, this series puts its characters in a multitude of situations, what would cause serious introspection of one's existence, like almost being raped, or beaten or partially beaten to death, but because there's no real consequences for the main cast of this series, nobody has any psychological trauma, pain, or damage because plot. It's not because they have strong wills, it's because plot, and the author doesn't feel like writing it down. Even the main character is so lazily written, his own quest for revenge is honestly put into question, considering he's not really traumatized by it. He's just some guy that goes out and likes killing things like a fucking psychopath. Not once throughout this manga do we actually see him traumatized by anything that he's done. In Punisher, if you ever read Punisher Max by Garth Ennis, or watched the Punisher Netflix series, you constantly see how Frank Consul is traumatized by PTSD and why that triggers him to ultimately go out there and kill criminals. Goblin Slayer, chapter through chapter, just goes out there and kills things without actually exploring the psychological condition of why he does what he does. Let me show you some fucking trauma real quick.
No, 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 no! Wait. Hey! Wait! Wait. Just wait. Oh, I figured I'd die in these woods anyway. Just now. Bury me, man. Just bury me. Promise me, bury me, okay? Stay here. Don't be back, Connor.
Throughout Goblin Slayer, there are 0 scenes that look anything that looks like real PTSD. Just like another fake anime, Violet Evergarden, that likes to use PTSD to justify some bullshit plots. Now, what you're probably immediately saying is, Punisher is not Goblin Slayer. Punisher takes place today. Well, I can pull out Game of Thrones if you like. And PTSD is all the same no matter what platform you put it on. It could be sci-fi, cyberpunk, steampunk, Middle Ages. All the symptoms of PTSD are the same, but experienced differently through the individual. Goblin Slayer does not have PTSD. Not once throughout the duration of this series does he see a ghost of his sister. He does not hear voices. He does not have nightmares. He's just this unstoppable wrecking machine throughout the duration of the story, despite the story making this big grandiose deal of, oh well, my sister mattered to me. Oh man, I'm killing all these goblins because my sister fucking died. Oh, I'm so angry. Get that bullshit out of here, man. This fucking lazy writing. And everyone's gonna point out, well, there's this one scene where priestess is all like, oh man, I'm having all these nightmares about my people dying from chapter 1, even though we don't care about any of those characters because they have no name. But point being, she has nightmares about them. That counts as PTSD, isn't that right? Well, let me explain why it's not PTSD. One, she tells us this and the story gives us it as exposition in chapter like 18 while she's in the hot tub and she's talking to Blade Maiden, whom she just met. And two, this isn't considered that PTSD because it only happens once in the story. Three, this doesn't change the dynamic of nature of the character from being optimism, I'm always happy, I always like Goblin Slayer, I don't disagree with him, and I'm just gonna keep on trucking on because everything I know is just gonna be better. It doesn't change the story. It doesn't communicate to us, the reader, the viewer, that Priestess has harboring this dark hatred for goblins like Goblin Slayer. It doesn't tell us this information. She's just blindly optimistic throughout the duration of the entire story. She shows no hints of actually suffering from anything that she describes within the story because it's treated as an event that doesn't matter within it because she's too busy bouncing her breast in the hot tub. I could make Goblin Slayer a lot better. And I could take a scene from Punisher, layer some Goblin Slayer clips over that, and it would seem way better than what it already is. Remember that dumb scene in Goblin Slayer that I complained about, I think, earlier in this video? When he's all like, oh, well, this shall not stand, and this is also the part of the story where he gets hit by a 100-ton mallet, ricochets off a wall, and lands into a casket and manages not to die miraculously, while in prior chapters we've seen him get knocked the fuck out by a rock, which somehow makes sense. But imagine that scene just occurs. Now, following that scene when Goblin Slayer appears to be knocked the fuck out, imagine this dream sequence occurs for the character.
Where's home, Frank? Is it here or is it there? I want to hear you say.
It's here. It's with you always. You know that.
I don't know that.
Just look at us. I gotta hit the park today, you know. Painted ponies. Eat a bunch of shitty food, right? Yeah. I'm not going back. I'm gonna stay. I'm done. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna stay with you. I'm gonna stay home.
You have to choose.
Don't make me do that.
Come home, Frank.
People think that I ask for a lot when it comes to storytelling, berserk level storytelling, but I'm not asking for a lot. I'm just asking for some people to use some common sense to write the story properly. Wouldn't it make sense during the entire arc where he was getting this shit kicked in by that giant orc, when he was beaten to death, for him to enter in like a dream state, him to meet his sister, which would be disguised as the god character, because the entire basis of Goblin Slayer's character is that god, and his sister Illusion, and all the other gods that create the dungeons of this world, can't control Goblin Slayer. He was supposed to die long ago, which the story in the Wikipedia explains, but for some reason that's unexplained to their knowledge, he continues to survive. So wouldn't it be a nice tie-in to the actual story for him to be nearly beaten to death, for God to come down in the form of his sister and to continue to tempt him to actually die. And of course, Goblin Slayer, being represented as Frank Castle, decides to stay here on the earthly plane to continue to kill goblins and stay with the people he cares about and he loves, while also continuously coming to the consensus he has to get past the death of his sister and be a better person than what he already is. But the problem with that plot is there's too much fucking character development, and no one gives a shit about any of the characters that are in this series. No one cares about Priestess, no one cares about Elsh Archer, no one cares about Lizard Shaman, no one cares about the dwarf guy, no one even knows who the fuck Goblin Slayer's sister is. Apparently she's this big grandiose character, but the story doesn't even want to give her any character development and treats her like a plot device. Actually tell the story instead of using everything as a contrived device. Oh man, I'm gonna have to make another fucking part for this, I just know it. But in short, what I'm saying here is, why is the writing in this series so fucking bad when everything is so counterproductive to what the story and the narrative and the themes that are actually trying to be displayed? What the fuck happened after 2010 when writing became so fucking terrible? We have stories like Vagabond, Vinland Saga, Berserk, Hunter x Hunter, I Am a Hero, Green's Blood, Night Run, Automata. I can go on and on, Blade of the Guardian, so many other series that are categorized as dark fantasies or dark in tone and genre that ultimately tell a story with actual psychological weight behind it, such as Tokyo Ghoul. What the hell happened to writing where we basically get this contrived version of, well, Goblin Slayer gets knocked the fuck out by a giant monster, he blacks out for a few panels, and then we get this, oh man, this shall not stand, rip them apart and tear them apart until it's done, kill the goblins, what is this so fucking good? No, it's not, it's so fucking terrible. What the hell happened? Why? Oh god, why? What happened? Ah! What happened to things like Samurai Champloo, where things actually mattered and the backstories actually had meaning behind? Why did this thing like Goblin Slayer? That series is so bad and I gotta make another video. Okay. Yes, everyone, we've established already from the title, Goblin Slayer is a shit series. But getting back more on topic, all the rape, the brutalized violence in combination with a world that makes zero sense in any amount. Another story I could have thrown out there was Ubel Blatt. I'm just noticing that, but Ubel Blatt did the stupidity of Goblin Slayer in his first volume or so, but then it ironed itself out to actually tell an actual narrative. But getting back to what I'm saying, with all the violence in combination with the zero make no sense mess of a world, in conjunction with the bad politics that makes no sense, which I explained in the prior video, makes it bad. But also, having antagonists that are, one, rapist, and secondly, defaultly evil, requiring the impregnation of human women to carry out their species, puts into heavy question once again, how competent are the people of the Goblin Slayer universe? And continuously, the bigger question, why does no one care, even though I logically proved in the other video why they should care? It's very confusing and it's really dumb, but the long story short of it, or the short story long of it is, if all the women are being slaughtered and raped by goblins, why doesn't anyone view this as a problem within their society? If creatures are ruining the ecosystem, destroying the agriculture, and literally staving off the only way humans have to produce, why isn't anyone doing anything about the problem? Goblin Slayer is stupid, and all the rape in this series just seems to be this retarded sex fantasy wish fulfillment by the author placed in the series. I don't know why he wants to show the goblins rape the humans with all the cum and semen stains all over their face and bodies. I don't know why he does it. And it all happens for no reason too, but to be eye candy for the viewer. All the women are artificially sexy and superficially beautiful, and automatically in the story, when we count to a character that we don't know, we automatically assume they're gonna get died or they're just gonna get fucking raped. But the reason why series like Berserk work and Yuba Blatt is because it maintains consistent serious tone. The reason why Until Death Does Us Apart works is because it maintains this serious, consistent tone, interjecting comedy here and there, and it doesn't cause this tonal whiplash of hee hee ha ha, look at this girl get raped in the next chapter, hee hee ha ha, let's pretend like that didn't happen. But what makes Goblin Slayer really frustrating is that the story features so much death and violence, but all that has no effect on the characters somehow. It doesn't affect them psychologically, it doesn't affect them physically, it doesn't affect anything about their personality or anything about who they are. It just remain these optimistic heroes that go around fucking killing goblins for the satisfaction of just killing them because they're psychopaths and they're not doing it for the good of society or anything. And you know, with the Goblin Slayer, my sister was raped backstory, even though that's somehow tied into it, the story doesn't want to make it a big deal and it doesn't even mention it in the story when it's necessary. And everything gets split away like it's normal, therefore it shouldn't be talked about when it happens. Girl get raped? Haven't heard that before. Freaking Goblin Slayer did, or that adventurers did, and you know, that happens here too. The story just plays it off like just fucking normal. Even in Warhammer 40k, when the bad shit happens, at least the characters act surprised when it's a surprise. I remember in Warhammer 40k when the Horus Heresy came out, and the characters at the end were like, "Nani? What's this, Horus? You betrayed everyone and began killing all your comrades and all the generals and leaders, and the Chaos Demons are getting closer to Earth, and they're gonna consume the entire universe, and you're doing all this because you're pissed at your father?" And he's all like, "Yeah, that's about right. Why?" And he just fucking kills everyone. And he kills his dad too. Well, he doesn't kill his dad. He gets maimed and he gets stuck in this golden throne, but that's like a 50-minute video to explain right there. But the point I'm trying here is that there's actually some things that matter within certain stories, while Goblin Slayer just washes it all away like, hey, it's just fucking normal. And the author writes this shit all like none of the violence is subjectable to the main cast having zero or little to none bad consequences happening to any of them because they're in the main cast of characters. So they aren't subjected to extreme violence or extreme baiting like any of the other characters in the series. Warhammer 40k, Berserk, and you know, a variety of the manga out there have the main characters fucking dying, they're screaming, they're losing fucking ligaments. But this dark fantasy, nah. Goblin Slayer, even though he fucking gets hit by a 100-ton mallet, ricochets off the wall into a casket, doesn't break his leg, he ain't maimed, he's still walking and running just like normal. Goblin Slayer gets hit on the head, behind the head with a rock, he only gets knocked out. He doesn't get like a concussion on the head or some type of brain contusion or a brain bleed or anything. He just gets on up and he keeps on fighting. Meanwhile, all the other characters get eaten by rock monsters, they're getting their legs cut off, they're getting fucking tortured, there's torture rape, all this bad shit happening to everyone else besides Goblin Slayer, because he's fucking invincible. Oh goddamn, I gotta make another video on this, I know I do! But I know what everyone's saying. Yeah, bad things happen to the cast of characters of Goblin Slayer. I'm not even gonna even edit that out. And I'm going to be surprised if anyone makes it to this point in the video, but I'm just going to keep on continuing on like that just didn't happen. But nothing really bad happens to any of the characters. Nobody gets maimed, no one loses any ligaments, no one gets any irreversible concussions, no one gets their ligaments replaced, nothing bad happens. The only thing that bad that actually considerably happens is that Priestess loses her virginity to Goblin Slayer. In conjunction to that, Priestess gets like her arm bitten off or a good chunk of it out, but she gets like resurrected and completely healed Wolverine style by a Deus Ex Machina magic that's able to pure versions of this world. It's really dumb. And she doesn't even get like a scar or anything to remind her of like the injury she got. While Goblin Slayer, like I said, gets thrown like a ragdoll and hurtled like a piece of meat without getting any injuries whatsoever, but gets healed by Ex Machina magic. And there's no battle damage, there's nothing in this series that actually shows that they're actually suffering or really getting hurt. There's no battle damage. And we all know battle damage affected Guts from Berserk, physically and psychologically, but hey, Goblin Slayer ain't Berserk, just a cheap imitation and a poor man's knockoff who doesn't even have the balls or the nuts to write a real story because he's too busy cracking jokes the entire time. All this series is just tits and ass the entire time. It's got so much tits and ass in it. There's a fucking death scenes in this series where they are dying and the artist literally draws the panties and the boob shots in there just so it can be there. There's no need for it, man. If they wore some proper armor and actually protected themselves instead of wearing this freaking lazily plated whatever the hell that outfit is, they basically would be protected. But no, they gotta show the freaking boobs and the panties when the characters are dying too because reasons. This series, man, is so trash. I don't even understand how people like this. It's like Sword Art Online, but 20 times worse. I'd rather read Exodus Online. I don't know why I'm remembering all these series all of a sudden, but I'm just gonna end this video before I blurt out like 20 of them. But to basically wrap everything up, all of the interesting plots the author could have written with common sense in using his mind to write the story properly, revolving around the topics of sexual abuse and brutalization in a meaningful way, while maintaining some narrative structure while acting mature. He doesn't do that. He does everything in his power to write the most mediocre plot possible with the most cardboard characters ever that are just obnoxious. They're just so obnoxious, it's so bad to read. They refuse to acknowledge the heinous bullshit that occurs in the world. They refuse to actually see for what it is as a dark place. They refuse to actually accept the reality of the situations that they're in. They refuse to have any introspections about who they are within the world. And to top it all off, the writer pushes out on writing anything good or serious because he knows if he writes a really serious arc or anything that amounts to having common sense, it would cause a plot hole within the story where ultimately he would have to regress some of the characters, even though character regression doesn't actually exist within the storytelling medium. Story regression exists, but story regression is just really bad writing and copying the plot out as long as possible by making the most blandest characters ever. The really sad thing about Goblin Slayer is if the author actually took the time and made the characters have introspection about who they are and what they do and why they do it, I would have no problem with all the rape, death, and violence in this series at all. If it was just a narratively driven character story focusing on the psychological aspects about the party instead of them having them travel place to place, laughing and goofing around, killing things, I would accept everything about this story. But like I said, the author manages to fail at telling the story spectacularly that this manga is just such a piece of shit. The story needs dynamic characters, not these passable ones based on brain-dead cliches that don't go anywhere. Goblin Slayer is some bullshit, and it can be pissed on and it can die in a grave. Sadly, in the next video, I'm going to be talking about why the Goblin Slayer character, the main character, is a Mary Sue, and the worst character ever.
何よいきなり私だって役に立とうとしてやってることなんだから怒んないでよどうせこの後の展開なんていつものことでしょ